Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, January 10th, 2022. For those of you that might be new to tonight's format, if you've never attended live, you could submit questions at any point, and Steve, who's moderating for me this evening, will post those in order anonymously. We also take pre-submitted questions. If you're listening to this broadcast, you can always post questions, comments, suggestions, requests to webinar@evoketherapy.com, and we'll get to all those pre-submitted questions before we get to any of the live questions this evening. So you can post those and then listen for the podcast when it comes out and take a look at what I have to say about those. Tonight, you can post questions for and about family and friends also. This is one of the broadcasts where we invite you to invite your family and friends if you want to share with folks the experience that you're having in wilderness therapy or with the intensives. You're also welcome to post questions from them, about them, or what have you. Before I get into answering the questions for this evening, I want to just talk about something that I think I just take for granted during during these broadcasts, and that is Evoke's Wilderness Therapy Program. Everybody attending live already knows what I'm talking about, but those of you that are listening to the broadcast via the podcast app might not know that Evoke Therapy Program started and runs a wilderness therapy program. That's our roots. That's where we come from. Think about going outside, disconnecting from nature, and immersing yourself in a small group living experience in the wilderness. On top of that, we have a whole health approach, attachment-based approach, a compassionate mindfulness approach. So if you have a child, a young adult, or an adolescent child with mental health issues, with addiction issues, I have never seen in my life a method that is as powerful and provocative as wilderness therapy to treat that. And I think the thing that's most probably misunderstood about wilderness therapy, of all the things that I hear as I travel all over talking about this, is how clinically sophisticated it can be. I think to me, it's so obvious, the approach, the delivery method, as I like to call it, because now that we're so inundated with electronics, we're always plugged in, we're always accessible. The new luxury is being unplugged, is being detoxed from our digital world. So if you want to learn more about that, you can contact our admissions folks. You can go to our website at evoketherapy.com. Having said that, like I mentioned, tonight is an open forum for family and friends of our Evoke clients. So I'm going to get to the pre-submitted questions that were sent in via the email webinar@evoketherapy.com, which you can always use to send in questions, comments, or suggestions. And then I'll take any live questions. So this first question reads this: I've been listening to the Evoke Finding You podcasts consistently since my son was at Evoke in 2019. They've been super helpful to me. Thank you, Dr. Reedy. I love the last episode on listening. I have two questions. Number one, you mentioned that a parent's feelings, opinions about their child can leak onto the child, even if the parent doesn't verbally express those feelings, opinions to the child. How does this leakage happen? How might parents think about this dynamic? I'm going to take one of the questions at a time. And the most obvious example is that it can come out passive aggressively or can come out unconsciously in what you say. Part of the training of being a psychotherapist is to make the unconscious conscious. And even in communication skills training, what you're doing is you're taking what is meant by the communication, not as not what's said with the words, but you're taking what's meant by the communication and you're making it overt, making the covert overt. So sometimes it just comes out sideways in what you say. Sometimes you ask a question when you really mean to give a statement, or vice versa. You make a statement when there's really a question there. And sometimes it's more subtle and nuanced than just coming out verbally sideways through what you have to say. Sometimes it's an energy, it's a behavior, think about this. I've seen this in non-therapy situations my entire life. When a child of any age, including our age, the age that we are, is listening to a parent or listening to a loved one, they can tell you what is meant by what that person says, even if others listening might not see or feel what is being addressed. It could be the look on somebody's face. It could be a small facial expression, the roll of the eyes, the body posture, the language. So part of the process that I'm talking about is we can own our feelings. We can own what's going on inside of us. I think the biggest misunderstanding in communication skills training is that people think that the reason that we talk about the I feel statement is because we want to say that it's my choice to feel angry or sad or happy or disappointed. I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's about choosing your feelings. I think it's about owning your feelings. And that's a very different process. The example that I've used over the years is if I go to tap you on the shoulder with a friendly tap and you've been abused by a large male figure in your life, because I'm a large male figure, and you flinch in reflexive response to my tap on the shoulder, it wouldn't be accurate to say that you felt scared, that in your feeling scared you chose to feel scared. But it would be accurate to say it is your fear. It is your fear. The choosing of the feelings, if I'm going to use that language, is something that happens over a long period of time. I can choose out of a feeling by doing my work. In this example that I've just given, if you'd been physically mistreated by somebody, you can, through psychotherapy, go through a process where you realize that not everybody who's touching you is meaning you harm. You can heal and unravel that trauma. So it's literally an infinite number of ways that can be communicated. And part of psychotherapy, the more you do, the more you realize how messages come out sideways. That's just one of the gifts, I suppose, of doing your work, is you realize how much is communicated nonverbal. You can become more aware of that. People that are less aware or new to the process don't realize that they're leaking. People that are more aware of themselves, have tuned into, have some more significant experience with the unconscious, they might be more apt to recognize how they're communicating their feelings, their energy. So that's the basic answer to question number one. Question number two is, you spoke about the parent as a container for the child. You often speak about a therapist's role being a container for the client. How is the parent-child relationship similar to or different than the therapist-client relationship? I ask this in part because I sometimes feel like I am impersonating a therapist as I listen to my son. Are there situations in which a parent might want to take a different approach than a therapist might? Does it even make sense to think of a parent's role as being similar to a therapist's role? I think the biggest difference between a parent and a child is, excuse me, between a parent role and a therapist role, is that the parent has to do it 24/7, 365 days a year. There's no there's no schedule where you take a break and it's only 1 hour a week. I think the other thing that's different is when I pay a therapist, when I pay for their time, because that's really what I'm paying for. I say this all the time, that that's the end of my contribution to the relationship, essentially. That's all I owe to the therapist. I don't owe them gratitude. I don't owe them I don't owe them appreciation. I don't owe them praise. I don't owe them affection. Whereas in a relationship that's a non-professional relationship like that, there's more give and take, right? There are kindnesses exchanged that are part of reciprocity. I think also what's different is the therapist takes care of themselves very, very formally away from the client, but not in the context of the relationship with the client. In other words, a therapist, if they're feeling down or sad or blue or disappointed or even hurt, it is incumbent upon them to take care of that, and not necessarily ask for the client to take care of them, if that makes sense. Whereas a parent can say, look, I'm overwhelmed, I'm hurting, here's what I need from you. Here's what could be helpful to our relationship. Here's what I need in our relationship. So there's more give and take. There's a quote that I love from a famous psychologist, says that the proper way of treating a child is the proper way of treating another human being. I wrote an article in Psychology Today a few years ago that says why you should be your child's friend, because of that old adage that you're not a parent is not a friendship. But really, there is more in common And that's part of your question. What's the similarities and the differences? There's more in common between a parent-child relationship and every other relationship because a parent has boundaries. A parent doesn't compromise their values, their ethics, just to make the child happy necessarily, just like they wouldn't in a friendship, just like a therapist wouldn't with a client. You wouldn't compromise your values as a therapist just so the client feels a certain something. The other thing that I wanted to say to this when I got this question, it came to me, even though it wasn't explicitly asked, is this: the parent child relationship is like a therapist client relationship, more one way than other relationships. The parent's primary role is containing for the child, and the child is not equipped, it's not appropriate, it's not helpful or healthy for the child to contain the parent. It breaks down. Let me give you an example where my mother gifted something to me by something she said that illustrates what I'm describing. My mother said to me many years ago, she said, "You will never love your parents as much as you love your children." And she said this in a the spirit of generosity, saying that she obviously loves me more than I could love her, and that I needn't feel guilt or like I was failing because I didn't have that same energy towards her that she had toward me. And she said it was the same with her and her parents. And really, it's the same between me and my children. So while a friendship or a marriage or other relationships, that there's a kind of an equal give and take, the parent occupies a position inside of the child's psyche that is not appropriate in reverse. I love what Carl Jung, the great psychologist, and James Hollis, one of my favorite modern Jungian writer today, when they talk about adults and children, they talk about the adults being the big people. James Hollis, Carl Jung will refer to the big people in the child's life, what the big people said or told me about myself. And I think what that language illustrates is this idea that I'm describing, that the big people are different. If my mother says something to me compared to what my child said something to me, it's going to have different weight on me. Now, if we don't do our work, we will put children in the parent role. Let me illustrate this. Let me illustrate that with this principle. When parents tell me, I'm afraid that my child will abandon me if I set boundaries, if I hold limits, if I make a stand for myself, that my child might abandon me when they turn 18 or abandon me if they're even younger or older than 18. And what I explain to parents is by definition, the way we describe the parent-child relationship, children can't abandon parents. Fundamentally, it is the parent's responsibility, as it is to some degree the therapist's responsibility. It is the parent's responsibility to get the majority of their needs met outside of the parent-child relationship. The parent is much more so a giver to the child than vice versa. And again, that might frighten some people or make them uncomfortable to think that somehow I'm encouraging a parenting relationship where the child is self-centered, and everything is about them, and the parent's needs can't be expressed. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the parent primarily is responsible for taking care of themselves, saying to the child, I'm not willing to do this. Here's my boundary. Here's what I can tolerate. And they can ask for help. Of course, you can ask for help from your children. But fundamentally, to take care of your ego, to take care of your esteem, to provide you a sense of belonging and safety, that is not the child's responsibility. And in that sense, the relationship is very, very similar. It's a big person and a small person. Think authority figure. It's similar. When people talk about their response to authority figures, in essence, they're giving us a glimpse into their own experience as the child of their parents, what it's like. So I hope that helps. I hope that's clear. The next pre-submitted question reads like this. My 17-year-old son was at Evoke March through June 2022, now at a therapeutic boarding school and graduating in May with his high school diploma. He then comes home and turns 18 in June. When he went to Evoke, he was using substances, marijuana and Delta 8. He suffered with anxiety, depression, had school refusal, technology overuse, and was isolating. He was home 2 weeks over Christmas for his home visit, and when he purchased a Delta 8 vape with THC, I felt not only very saddened, but also wronged and deceived. Our parental boundary is no drug use when you come home in May. We've told him he cannot live at home if he's going to choose to use marijuana and Delta 8 again. By the way, Delta 8 is a certain chemical strain in marijuana. It's not important. I've explained to him it's my boundary, as I cannot subject myself to the stress and anxiety I feel when he uses. I don't know if he suffers with addiction to marijuana or exactly what is going on with him as he's contemplating whether he will use again once he graduates. Can you give your thoughts on this situation? What advice or suggestions do you have? And last, I've gone as far as thinking about medical marijuana as a potential meet in the middle ground. And I'd like your thoughts on that as well, please. This is a difficult one to answer, and my my opinion on this has changed pretty substantial over the years. Let me highlight a couple of my thoughts about this. Number one, as I've always said, and this hasn't changed, you can decide whatever you want. Whatever you allow into your house is your right. And if it's too triggering for you or overwhelming or threatening or uncomfortable, those are all boundary languages, right? Those are all words that speak to boundaries. You're allowed to, psychologically speaking, you're allowed to set that boundary. That's okay. Every parent has their limits and every child discovers their parents' limits. The problem becomes when the parent says, this is absolutely objectively right. This is the way things are. When they don't own their boundary, when they don't own the need, and they argue for some kind of objective truth in the matter. That's where the child starts to experience something's wrong with them instead of saying, I have a human parent, a limited, fallible, imperfect human parent. That's the difference there. So you can say, I'm not comfortable. This doesn't work for me. Now, what has changed over the years is for myself is I've expanded my capacity, I think is the best way to say it, my flexibility. As I've said over the years, I have 4 children today, ranging in age between 30 and 15 to in between. And some of the same rules and lines I drew with my 30-year-old and my 28-year-old, I've relaxed on with my 20-year-old and my 15-year-old, not because I've become more codependent. That's the mistake, but because I've found a way to take care of myself. I don't get, for example, as you write in your question, I don't get triggered by it anymore. I have more of an attitude of, you'll figure it out, and it has nothing to do with me. Now, again, if substance use in my life shows up in disrespectful behavior, mistreatment of me or others in the family or our household, I draw the line there now. So something like marijuana use for anxiety, for depression, for somebody just using it to relax. I have more bandwidth today than I used to. I've always said, and I think you said it very well in your question, it's not about whether or not I think you are an addict or you have a problem with substances. That's not really my business. It never has been. The boundary is, here's what I'm comfortable with. Because like you said in your question, figuring out whether somebody else is an addict is essentially irrelevant. In treatment of codependency, which is really just treatment of relationship health. That's what codependency is about relationship health. In treatment of codependency, one of the first things you learn is it's none of your business whether or not somebody's an addict, whether or not your husband, your wife, your partner, your child has a problem. It's about what you're comfortable with and what you're not. So you can do what you want. I've relaxed. I've expanded my tolerance of others in some of these ways. I used to be triggered by it, whereas now I'm not. I'm a little bit more comfortable watching somebody bumble along their journey and figure it out. And even somebody who struggles a little bit, I'm a little bit more comfortable saying, I think you'll figure it out. I posted something, shared something this week that said a wise person is somebody who's made a lot of mistakes, period. And I believe in that. So again, you get to decide what you want. You get to decide what your boundaries are. You get to decide what makes you feel okay and safe. All of those are universally true. 100 times out of 100, I would support you in setting the boundaries that you need to. And I would also suggest or invite you to be aware of the idea that we all learn by making mistakes. And there's a cost to drawing some lines. You lose something in there. You lose some connections. Again, if you're being violated, it's worth it, right? You don't just look for company and look for belonging and look for relationship because you're terrified of being alone and it can come at any cost, right? That in essence is codependency. But you can get to a place where you can say, you can do you within these limits. You can do you. And I'm going to be over here on my side of the street working on me. And if you encroach on my side of the street, that's when the boundary is going to come out. And that encroachment, that comfort level, that capacity, that enlargement can change and fluctuate from day to day, from year to year, and throughout our life. So that's my answers. I'm pretty flexible with it. Right now, today, my boundary around that is if you are under the age of 18, it's a no-go in my home. And if you're over the age of 18, I don't have a lot of, I mean, if the drinking age or the using age is 21, I'm not going to support illegal activities in my home. That's just because of my own comfort. Again, that's for me. See, that's the language of recovery from codependency is what's comfortable for you. And that's why I started off with saying anything that any boundary you set from that place it is absolutely appropriate. So I'm sure that's clear as mud, but that's my thought. The third pre-submitted question reads like this. My preteen daughter has been in a therapeutic boarding school for 5 months. We needed additional support helping her heal from reactive attachment disorder, PTSD, etc., from years of neglect prior to entering foster care and then our subsequent adoption. I was also diagnosed with PTSD after difficult years of parenting, which brought up some childhood wounds I've been working through in therapy. Over the past couple of months of our daughter being away from home, I have noticed my system returning to a baseline of lower stress. It has been shocking to realize how I was functioning on high alert constantly when she was in our home. Now, I notice I immediately feel in a state of panic for anything in my day regarding her, whether our weekly phone calls or therapy sessions, receiving information from her school, making plans for visiting her, etc. I am wondering how to begin to heal these triggers during this time of space between us and how to maintain that healing once she is back home. I know my dysregulated system has exacerbated to her own dysregulation, and I can understand more of her experiences through dealing with this struggle myself. First of all, what a great gift. What a great gift you have to offer as a parent to a struggling child, which is relating through your own struggle. That's wonderful. I wish this is going to sound strange, but I wish every parent could do that. But a lot of parents don't really confront their own struggles. Like it sounds like you've been compelled to in this experience. So that's a great gift that I just want to acknowledge. I think about mental health on a continuum. I've said, this is part of my philosophy, part of the culture that I talk about. And that is to say, I think everybody has some trauma triggers. Everybody's been dented. Everybody has some trauma that is worthy of attention. And so yours might be more extreme. It might reach a clinical threshold in certain areas that other parents don't reach. And in a sense, it's kind of a gift. One of the most, I think, difficult parts about what we call small T trauma versus big T trauma, the more obvious traumas. One of the most insidious aspects of small T trauma is that there's no picture to show somebody. There's no story to tell. It's less visible, less obvious, less conscious. But we all have some small T trauma, often called developmental trauma, relationship trauma, attachment trauma. We all have some of that. Everybody was raised by human parents. So, having laid that groundwork so far to answer this question, what I would say is you just keep doing your work. When I train therapists, part of what I say is, and whatever that looks like, whatever your work looks like, for me, it looks like psychotherapy. But back to the idea, when I train therapists, part of what I say to them is the goal is to keep somebody in their work because healthy people continue to grow and evolve and change and heal. Right? That's the definition of being a healthy person, not being done or completed or whole or finished, but being on the journey. And so when you're a therapist, therapists who pride themselves. I was just looking at somebody, I got an email blast this week from one of the coaching services out there. And one of the little bullet points that they listed is we don't sugarcoat things. And I thought, yeah, I've met people like you who pride themselves on punching the defense in the nose and think somehow that's therapeutic. So back to this point is when I train therapists, it's being a welcoming and safe person that a person wants to come back to. Avoiding behaviors that are going to cause a sense of feeling threatened, a sense of being unsafe or ashamed or guilted or judged by the therapist. A good therapist prides themselves on what they don't say, what they don't say. A good therapist prides themselves on how the client feels safe when the client starts to tell them the truth. When the client, not when a therapist points out a defense in a client, but when a client feels safe enough that they don't need the defense to protect themselves from feeling unsafe. So all of this in a roundabout way comes back to answering your question, which is you just keep doing your work. And the question might come up, when is it the right time then to reintroduce our child back into our home, knowing that I am a lifelong work in progress, like we all are? And the answer is that's the work of becoming you. It's not very different than somebody saying, how do you know if you love somebody? Or how do you know if it's the right time to get married or divorced for that matter? Oftentimes I hear this question. I asked it myself first in psychotherapy, but I hear this when I'm training therapists or when I'm doing therapy that people say, I just don't know how to respond to somebody. Am I being too rigid or am I being a doormat? Am I demanding too much or am I giving too much up? And my answer playfully to that question is yes. That's the right question. That's the question of finding you. That's the name of this podcast. That's the name of our intensive program. Finding out who you are. That's the work of a lifetime. You get to decide. But because most of us were raised in contexts, we were cooked in the soup, if you will, as I like to say, where there was a right and a wrong and an objective truth. We fall prey to that myth, that thinking error, that there's some way to define it objectively. Obviously, there might be markers and measures and anecdotes that can be helpful in understanding relationship, but ultimately, you get to decide. And lastly, when I tell parents they get to decide, when a child says, "Well, if you need to work on stuff, why am I paying for it?" The child will say, "In our program, happens all the time." And my response is, "Yeah, that's kind of the unfair thing." Parents' issues spill onto their children. Parents dent their children. You cannot not dent your child. But as you grow up as an adult and become an adult, you realize that the dents so worthy of our attention and efforts that the dents are ours. And that's the way that it works. And I will listen to children, to young people complain, be angry, frustrated at that process, that the river kind of flows in that direction. I'll empathize with them, but it's also just the truth of things. So, and like I started off, it's the fact that you're working on anything in therapy is a wonderful, wonderful gift. All right, somebody writes this. Somebody writes, I understand that the most important thing I can do to help my child is to understand my own issues and do my work. I've been doing that and have made leaps and bounds in my own recovery, including attending a Finding You workshop. I'm pleased with myself and my progress. My question is about repairing the relationship with my child. I am living the amends and doing things differently, yet my child is still emotionally unhealthy. When do I apologize for my past behaviors, and how much do I share about my own family of origin issues? I am not sure my teenagers are ready wanting to hear this, and I don't want to burden them with the heavy stuff. Yet I want to take responsibility so there can be forgiveness and we can have a better relationship. They don't just seem to be interested in that yet. Do I need to be patient until they are ready for, presumably when they get into full adulthood? If not, what can I do? Fantastic and difficult question to answer. You're right. We don't. There's a boundary there that you're alluding to, and it's real and it's important and it's part of healthy parenting and healthy behaviors, where you don't give your children access to everything that's going on. To be ridiculous. When I've been teaching parents that there's a difference between being honest with your child and telling them everything. The example that I use is you don't tell them about your sex life with your co-parent or with anybody for that matter. That's inappropriate. So it's not being dishonest to not mention or discuss your sex life. Just like in your case, it's not dishonest to not share about those things. Having said that, you can apologize for what you do. You can apologize for your awareness of your imperfections when you come up short. Parents who practice this, sometimes teenagers or children of any age will say, I don't want to hear it. And that's okay too. It doesn't have to be a long, intimate, detailed discussion about where it comes from. In our family, it's a little bit different because we have 4 therapists and 1 organizational psychologist in our family. So there's a lot of discussion around family of origin issues going in every direction. Our children are more comfortable, but it's not emotionally charged. My answer to your question is this. If you're doing it with a therapist, if you're unloading, unraveling, unwinding your trauma with your therapist, that's where you take care of that. And as I was reading your question, I was challenged by it because I was thinking, this is something where if you were my client, you would give me specific examples in specific contexts and situations, and we would talk about if that's too much. Because as somebody from the outside looking in, I would have a perspective on that's hard to have when you're inside it, when you're in it yourself. I'm a big proponent of self disclosure, but not when the person on the other end of the disclosure feels a responsibility to take care of me. Even in psychotherapy, sometimes when I own something, or in parenting when I own something, when I feel a certain kind of energy from the other person, either something that looks like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, are you okay? On the more vulnerable side of things, or somebody who's more angry and threatened by it and says something like, I don't want to hear it, or Dad, I'm tired of you. The important thing, like in all relationships, I was just sharing this with somebody today, is not the mistake is not the first thing that you say. It's the second thing. And what I mean by that is if you offer an idea, a suggestion, if you decide that you're going to vaguely, without going into great detail, share with the child that you're aware that you have some codependency that comes from your own childhood and growing up with an alcoholic father, for example. If that's part of your story and part of what you decide to share with your child, and the child rejects it, if you're willing to drop it, you're okay. If you offer an insight or a perspective to a client and it doesn't fit for whatever reason, that's okay if you drop it. But the mistake that most of us make because of our own ego is we double down. We continue to talk. We defend our first statement. And we don't just defend it once, we defend it 2 and 3 and 4 times. That is the error. So the idea of holding it lightly, of trying it out, of getting a feel for what it means to the child for them to hear this. A lot of parents that grew up in families where boundaries were diffuse will overshare, and the child will feel some. It's similar. It's very similar to the sex example. If you were to share your sexual thoughts and feelings with your child, many children, most children who have a healthy sense of boundaries would feel uncomfortable with that, would feel encroached upon. They would feel an intrusion past their boundaries. And so part of the work is becoming aware of and sensitive to other people's boundaries, specifically your children. So that's my it's complex. One of the difficult things about a question like this is there are not a lot of generic lines or examples. There are principles that guide us that we reference, but there's no absolute right way to say it. I asked my therapist one time, because my therapist doesn't do a lot of self-disclosure, although I've read books about her life written by her, so some of it's out there. But in the course of a session, she doesn't get into a lot of details with self-disclosure. And I've asked her, I said, why don't you do that? Because I definitely get the feel from you when I work with you over the 24 years I've been working with her, that you're human, that you're fallible, that you make mistakes, that you struggle. I definitely get that sense from you, but you don't tell the story behind it. And she just simply said, I don't feel like I have to. I feel like I can accomplish it in being very vague, making vague reference to the issues. And as a client, it unburdens me in a lot of ways. I feel the connection, I feel the resonance, and I don't get stuck or lost in the trappings of trying to take care of her in the process. When I teach therapists and staff about self-disclosure, there's a principle in there that I've already referred to, but I want to be clear about. I say, if you're not in psychotherapy, working on the issue that you're disclosing about, or you haven't been in psychotherapy, working on that issue, I would be skeptical about your self-disclosure. So that's a really good sign. That's a really good reference point. If you're in psychotherapy or have been in psychotherapy and you've processed this issue and there's no need that you have, if I were to tell you about, for example, my childhood and something that I experienced, and there was no need I had in terms of how you responded, you could ignore it, you could blow it off, you could not relate to it, you could tell me that it was silly, for example. That's an example of what I'm describing. If I'm okay with that, then the self-disclosure is probably safe because I'm taking care of somewhere else. And in my case, it's in psychotherapy with my therapist. So that's another piece. If you're working on it, if you have a psychotherapist, you can discuss specific issues with them. But if you share something and you can let go of the reaction, let go of what they do with it. I had a parent say, "How about if I write this note to my child?" It was something about expressing love or regret about something they had done. I said, "I think it's fine the way you've worded it." And they may throw it away or rip it up right in your face. And if that feels too raw and vulnerable for you might not want to share it because that tells me you have a need. You have a, as they say, a dog in the fight, so to speak. So that's the way that I think about it. All right, the next question reads like this. Throughout my process of doing my work alongside my daughter, I have come to realize that setting and implementing my own boundaries is very difficult for me as related to childhood trauma. Before I even go on to the rest of your question, I want everybody to hear that and admire that because that's true about almost everybody struggling with boundaries. So I love that you're seeing yourself. As I've stated recently and even written about it and posted about it in my social media, which is largely just therapy, therapeutic ideas, I've described that each descent into the basement of my issues reveals that there's another door and another set of stairs that goes even deeper. And that mental health in a very large way is realizing how imperfect you are, how damaged you are, realizing how, when I say it playfully, realizing how screwed up you are. That the outcome of good psychotherapy, effective psychotherapy, rather, the outcome is realizing that you are a beautiful miracle and just a mess all at the same time. And then that's okay. Whereas most people think the goal is to think that you're good or great. That's actually part of the wounding, right? The old Carl Jung idea, I'd rather be whole than good. Integration realizes that you do have the issue. So I know that's a long insertion into the question, but I just wanted to highlight and compliment you and share with everybody how beautiful it is. Okay, so I'll start over. Throughout my process of doing my work alongside my daughter, I've come to realize that setting and implementing my own boundaries is very difficult for me as related to childhood trauma. Despite that, I do now understand and am practicing boundary setting. I am finding that because I have been in the practice of setting boundaries well over 50 years, I am rotten at it. Again, wonderful. Simply knowing what my boundary is takes an incredible amount of work and effort for me. But yes, I'm starting to do it. Then moving on and implementing the boundary, I have no practice of grace or being subtle in setting the boundary. I am abrupt and jarring, even set off my own triggers while setting my own boundaries. Bottom line, what does the practice of implementing boundaries well look like once I know what they are? It looks exactly, perfectly like you. That's my answer. That's what healthy boundary, the practice of healthy boundary development and setting looks like. It looks exactly like you, the person that wrote this question. I really sincerely want you to hear that. My therapist, she's somewhere in her mid 80s, been in analysis and therapy herself for decades, written now, I've lost count of the books. I had some count when it was approaching 30, but it's well into the 30s now. Written 30 or more than 30 books, some of them being very, very sophisticated and dense therapeutic manuals, would talk exactly like you. She would talk about it from the beginner's mind perspective. I think I shared, I don't know if you were listening or watching when I shared this, but a couple of months ago, I was working with a therapist at one of our intensives, somebody I really like, I really click with and have a good friendship with. But I was just starting to know them in a deeper level while we were working together. And one of the things that my co-facilitator said to me during the first day is he said, "Hey, we live kind of close to each other. Would you like to drive to the intensive each day together and drive home? Might be a good time to chat or to decompress or just get to know each other better." He didn't say all that in detail, but he just offered the drive. And I abruptly said no. And I found myself, just like you, triggered by my own response. Abrupt, jarring, right? Kind of silly and young sounding. And I'm supposed to be the teacher and the mentor here. And then moments later, I said to him, I said, I just want to apologize. I'm working on setting boundaries. I'm working on not saying yes right away. And in that practice, in that work, it comes out like it just did. I love my favorite book, and I mentioned this many times, is a podcast, one of our most listened to podcasts about the book, The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner, Dr. Harriet Lerner. I absolutely love the book. And one of the things that she describes in the book is when people are new to setting boundaries or new to setting boundaries with a specific person or a situation, they'll often go through what she says the obnoxious phase. And by the way, I'll let you know when I get through the obnoxious phase completely in all of my life because I'm not through it. But she talks about this obnoxious phase, this jarring kind of dramatic boundary setting style that you're describing yourself as. And the idea is be kind to yourself, be kind to others who are entering the practice. We all are our relative children when it comes to this work. Now, I'm better at boundaries than I was 20 years ago, for sure. Maybe even 10 and 5 years ago. I'm making improvements in my life. But relatively speaking, in terms of some kind of ideal, I'm a beginner just like you. So your post, I'm so glad you wrote your post tonight. I'm so glad that I read your post tonight because that's what somebody in recovery sounds like. That's why we use language like in recovery, on the path. It's the journey, not the destination. It sounds like you're doing it, and you're going to do it obnoxiously at times. You're going to do it primitively at times. And that's that's why it's always practicing boundaries, practicing self-care, practicing meditation, practicing communication skills. Right? Nobody says I'm 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 perfectly executing boundaries these days, or I'm perfectly executing my communication style these ways. There's moments, I have my moments about once a month where I do something incredibly talented and smooth in my interpersonal relationships. But in between those 5-minute periods that I experience once a month, I'm stumbling through it just like you. So you sound like somebody who's been in psychotherapy and practicing boundaries for 30 years, not somebody who's new to it, because that's what somebody who's experienced sounds like. I could just go on and on and praising you, but I'll just pause now and go to the next question. But thanks for sending that in. Wonderful. I'll say one last thing. I lied. We used to have our parent support groups. Now we do them online, but we used to do them when I traveled all over the country. So I'd meet with groups of folks, some who I knew through these broadcasts, or maybe I met them when they came to our program, or maybe they were the parent of one of my clients. Some I knew, some I was virtual strangers to and with. And when people would do their first introduction, the young parents, and I mean young in the sense that they were new to the process, would say things like, "We're good parents." They might even say things like, "I'm not quite sure what our child has to be so upset about." And then other parents, farther along in the process, would say, "We're beginning to realize how much we don't know, how fallible we are, how many mistakes that we make." See, that's the person who's more advanced. The person who says, "I'm a good parent, I really worry about the child." The parent who says, "I realize how much I've screwed up. I think to myself, that child has a chance at a really, really great relationship with their parents." You see what psychotherapy is? It's not being good. It's not coming to realize how wonderful you are. That's a part of it, but it's coming to realize how flawed and imperfect you are and being okay with that. Psychotherapy, the result of it is non-judgment, not good judgment, not you are good like Ram Dass talks about. A quote that I love from Ram Dass, where he says most people try to counteract the I am bad energy inside of themselves with I am good. And then he goes on to explain, but that doesn't really work because sometimes you're not good. Sometimes you're the opposite. Sometimes you're generous and sometimes you're stingy. Sometimes you're aware and sometimes you're unconscious. Sometimes you're kind and sometimes you're cruel. And self-esteem and growth is being at peace with all of yourself. And by the way, the great, great mystery and paradox, better said by Carl Rogers, the master therapist, than me, when he said, "It's only when I accept myself that I can change." And so the person who can see their dents and their bruises is much, much, much farther along the path because they've overcome guilt and shame. The very thing that we were taught by our parents and the big people around us growing up that was going to keep us safe and on the straight and narrow. When we learn in psychotherapy to get rid of that judgment that we still carry around inside of us, that's when we can heal and change and improve. But we're terrified to give up guilt and shame, guilt specifically, because we have been told that without it, we would become monsters. And it's just not true. All right. Next question. How is the determination recommendation made as to the length of stay at a voc? When does this conversation occur regarding recommendations or not for students to transition to a residential treatment center? I'll give you the principle, but I'll also give you the averages. Around week 5 ish is when those discussions start to have meaning and teeth to them, texture and depth to them. We're pretty open-minded, but our experience tells us that for a lot of families, when children get to this point in terms of their acting out, their mental health issues, when families get to this point, maybe it's better to say it that way, that oftentimes a therapeutic school afterwards is going to be a better transition for afterwards. It's not an indictment on a family because everybody's so sick. It's just developmentally, the child is the child. It's like if I were to go home with my mother. I'm 50. What am I now? I'm 54 years old. If I were to go home and live with my mother for some reason today, we would struggle. We would be triggered. We would regress. We would bump into each other in significant ways. That's true of many of us. We just finished the holiday season, so I don't have to sell you all on that idea. You just experienced it in many ways. Many of you did. So part of our bias from our experience in doing this work is that's a likely outcome for families. Having said that, we're open and we start to talk about it around midway through 4 or 5. You can ask it from the beginning because the therapist is thinking about it from day one. But what you're going to get in the first couple of weeks is you're going to get their biases that come from their history of practicing this work. And that's interesting information, but it's not necessarily related to your child and your specific family. So we start to talk it around midway through the program. So around week 4, 5, 6, things come into focus and can be spoken of with more specificity and certainty. But the fact of the matter is, it's a dialogue that we have with you. Right? It's something we do together. It's affected not only by the child's behavior, but by the parents, how they're doing, how the family mixes together. What are the risks factors for the child in their context outside of the parents? Are they going to go back to the same school, the same environment? Is their behavior life threatening? Their substance use disorder, their self-harm, their depression, is it debilitating and potentially life threatening? That changes recommendations, right? How close are they to 18? Overall, do we have some sense of their maturity? There are 17-year-olds who are 17, and there are 17-year-olds who are 12, and there are 17-year-olds who are 25. So it's a complex matrix that happens in discussion. When I start with a family having that discussion that you've asked about, oftentimes I don't know where I'm going to arrive. In fact, most of the time, much of the time, I don't know where I'm going to arrive in terms of my recommendation until the discussion is in process. When a parent says, I want to reward them for their hard work. I want to bring them home. I want to show them that I love them, that I'm not getting rid of them. I worry about that child coming home. When a parent says, I know we're not done. We have a tremendous amount of work to do. I'm going to stay in therapy. I know there are going to be pitfalls, so we're going to have support. I'm nervous. I have a lot of trepidation about my child coming home. I have confidence in that parent's ability when the child comes home. When a child says to me, I want to go home because I miss being home, I miss my friends. If that's the only insight they bring to that discussion, I worry about them. When a child says, I'm kind of scared to go home, I think you're getting ready. You're getting closer. Do you see how it's paradoxical? These are, if you've been in situations as a family where this kind of intervention was necessary or needed or valuable, you know what's at risk. And respecting the challenges, respecting the forces and the energies that bring everybody in the family back into old behaviors is a part of a family's readiness. A kind of superficial optimism is a problem. So that's some of the more nuanced complexities of that discussion. But to answer your question more specifically, around week 5, give or take, is when things start to come into focus and become more specific and applicable to you and to your child. All right, one last question. Somebody says, what is the best way to talk to your spouse about their parenting, specifically that they're not providing a safe container for your child to express their emotions, instead telling the child that they have their reactions, responses are over the top, don't match the event, need to be less, etc. I have a highly sensitive 8-year-old who has large emotions about everything, and my husband and 16-year-old daughter are always telling her that she is overreacting. One of the things I think I've shared with you before, I'm going to pull it up for those that are watching live. Um, I have this hanging up on my refrigerator. The reason I bring this up is because you want to strike while the iron is cold. Among other things, what I suspect from the description that you've given me of your husband and your 16-year-old is they're going to be defensive about anything you say. If they're not defensive, you probably don't even have this question. It would just be easy. You could just walk into the next room after this broadcast and tell them what they're missing. And they would say, oh my gosh, thank you. That's so wise. And I'm so grateful for all the work you've done. And I'll incorporate that immediately. But that's not going to happen. So I have this posted. In fact, I'm happy to share it with anybody who emails me at webinar@evoketherapy.com. Just ask for the response to the other. It's also in the Audacity to Be You in a different format, but it has a list of safe responses and unsafe responses. In the book, I call them attachment-based responses or attachment harmful responses, I think, something like that in the book. So I would, first of all, strike while the iron is cold. Don't talk about it in a moment when tensions are high, when threats are present, when nervous systems are upregulated. Don't talk about it then. Less is more. One of the great moments in my parenting and my being a partner happened several years ago when my wife and daughter at the time, who was in elementary school, got into an argument with each other in front of me. It was a Saturday. I think I was eating cereal in the kitchen at the counter, and my daughter and my wife got into a fight about a Mother's Day gift that the child had made for my wife, and both after a moment sounded like children. And I'm watching this, and I remember I was, it was a Saturday. I was rested. I was feeding myself literally, so I was okay. My nervous system was regulated. And I remember when they finished the argument, and I think it ended up in my daughter trying to rip up and ruin the present that she wanted my wife to open up early. I said nothing. I was quiet. I didn't even look at my wife. I just kept eating and eventually cleaned up my stuff. And after a few moments, my wife came over to me and said, "Thank you." And I knew what she meant. She meant I didn't come at her with my self-righteousness, my correction, my feedback. She was already upregulated, and to introduce something to somebody, an idea, a concept about somebody in terms of correction when they're upregulated, it's a guaranteed loss. See, the nervous system regulation, the upregulation, the threat response, when it's high, nothing gets in. The goal in therapy, the goal in communication and in relationships, intimate relationships, is to downregulate your system first. That's the first thing. To wait or offer a response to the other where they can downregulate their nervous system. In other words, they're lowering their threat response, going from, I don't know what the DEFCON levels are in our government, but I think DEFCON 5 is the highest. Going from DEFCON 5 to DEFCON 1, and then some information can get there. Strike while the iron is cold. And be willing, like I mentioned earlier, to drop it. But mostly it's through modeling, it's through small comments. The best way, folks, that you can show your co-parent that they need to do more work is to demonstrate the fruits of your work. And I was so proud of myself in that moment when I said nothing, because I knew my wife knew. And I knew that if I'd even looked at her and said anything, I was just going to become a part of the problem. I was going to poke at somebody who was already feeling threatened and unsafe and dysregulated. So Model it by apologizing for your mistakes. Model it by demonstrating it. I brought up this sheet of paper and put it before you, the safe versus the unsafe communication, and I tell you that it's hanging on my fridge right now because it's kind of a roundabout way. You're not walking in through the front door. Like I mentioned earlier, you're not punching the defense in the nose. The defense is there for a good reason. The person who's demonstrating a defense is telling you that they don't feel safe, and they have good reason. Given their background and their life's history, they have good reason to not feel safe because the defense takes a lot of energy. My therapist uses the analogy of crutches. If any of you ever used crutches, it's kind of fun maybe for about 10 seconds. But if you had to walk through a grocery store or through a mall or through an airport with crutches, you know that it's absolutely exhausting and painful. And so, like my therapist's trainer told her when she's being trained, don't go around stealing people's crutches. Dr. Fox said to my therapist when she was in training, she said to the group of students, you all have a closet full of crutches and you pride yourself in stealing people's crutches. But instead, heal the wound, the knee, the ankle, the leg. And the person will be happy to give up their crutches because the crutches are requiring so much energy and effort. So less is more. Small is better than big. Waiting is better than right away. Respecting and honoring the defense, which is, by extension, honoring the original wound in the first place. Your husband comes from a context where it wasn't safe to make mistakes and be vulnerable, especially in important relationships like children. And because he comes from that context, like most of us do, it's going to be very threatening to hear feedback about how he's screwing up and failing. And ultimately the I mean, think about that. I'll just end with this. Like I said, if psychotherapy is realizing kind of how screwed up you are and finding non-judgment, think about how much work and time that takes. I wrote recently that the greatest barrier to growth is the pace. It takes a long, long time. Yes, there are epiphanies and moments of great awareness that happens, and those are wonderful. But most growth is over the period of years, and when you know that, that's part of what's given me more patience for my children in 2023 than I had for my children in 2007 and in 2010, is because I have become more of a friend to my own horrible, rotten self, and so I'm more friendly and patient with other people's horrible, rotten selves. So it's a tricky one. Thanks for asking it. All right, folks. Um, I'll go over the upcoming. My two books, as you know, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. You can find the audiobooks. I narrated The Audacity to Be You. We have new programming that I'm really excited about. On February 1st through 5th, we're doing a multi-couples intensives. Right now, we have one couple spot open. So if you want to come, this is not for couples who are on the brink of divorce. These are for couples who want to come and get closer by doing their work together. February 1st through 5th, I'm actually going to be running that with my wife. So I'm really excited. It's been a long time since we co-facilitated an intensive. So February 1st through 5th, one couple spot open for that. On February 24th, I'm going to be hosting my third conscious parenting workshop, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. It's much more affordable than coming to an intensive, and it's much more interactive than these broadcasts. So we limit it to 24 total people, including if there are two people on the screen. So if you want to attend that, February 24th, 9:30 to 4:30, the first two have been wonderful. May 26th, I'm going to be hosting a masterclass on attachment-based therapy. This is for therapists and therapeutic staff, therapeutic personnel. I've had many people ask, can non-professionals come? And my answer is yes, you can come. But understand that I'm going to be gearing the lecturing and the teaching towards therapists. So I'm not going to be spending a lot of time. I'll make the same parallels that I make with parenting and the other relationships to therapy that I always do, that I did tonight. But it's going to be geared toward professionals and professional therapists. So May 26th, 9:30 to 4:30 p.m., a masterclass on attachment-based therapy. If you need continuing education credits, there'll be 6 credits available for attending this session. And then I'm going back to the UK. We were planning on going back to the UK to host another intensive, another Finding You weekend in a beautiful, beautiful location in the UK. So that was during COVID and we had to postpone it. So we're back June 23rd through 25th. That will fill up many months in advance. So Finding You weekend in the UK. Looking forward to that. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, the Finding You intensive that I've made several references to this evening, the next available one is February 22nd through 26th, or online January 27th through 29th. I've been really wonderfully impressed and surprised by the kind of work that can happen during the online process. It's about a third of the cost, it's half the time, and you don't have to travel. So if finances and time are something that is in limited supply, the online option is a wonderful. We also have custom finding connection intensives for couples and finding family for families. Just contact intensives@evoketherapy.com. We have support groups for families, both current and alumni families, for our Willers families, current and alumni. The next offering is January 19th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have a meeting that's just for our alumni families. So January 24th at 6:30 p.m. is that offering. And then we have once a month support groups for intensives alumni. February 14th, Valentine's Day, 6 p.m. Mountain Time is the next offering for that. Contact Sarah D, SARAD, the letter D, at evoketherapy.com for more information on those or to register. If you want a coach who's trained in attachment theory and attachment-based therapy, you can contact coaching@evoketherapy.com. Individual work, parenting work, couples work, any kind of similar to therapy, any kind of context that you want to do your work in, our coaches can do that virtually no matter where you live. So check it out, coaching@evoketherapy.com. We have pursuits trips for families and young adults. Think Therapy Light. These are custom programs that last from 3 to 30 days all over the world, actually. We've done them in Nepal, South America, Central America, done them in Canada, and of course, many in Utah because we have wonderful adventure activities here. We ask all current families to go to 12 to attend 6 12 support. We're going to edit that out, Steve, of the broadcast. We ask all current families to try out 6 of the 12-step support groups. Any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, or adult children. You can go online. You can attend them online virtually or, of course, in person. You can also go to refugerecovery.org or NAMI.org to find free classes and resources in your area to help with your mental health. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, or you can also go to soundcloud.com and listen on your computer. You can also go watch them on Evoke's YouTube channel. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can also find Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, we have new content on our Evoke Therapy blog on our website all the time, so check it out. If you want to give back to help people that can't afford therapy, the 3 charitable partners that we work with are choosementalhealth.org, sky'sthelimitfund.org, or evokefamilyfoundation.org. You can go there. You can even earmark your donation to apply toward an Evoke experience if that's something that's important to you. My next broadcast will be Thursday next week, that should say Tuesday, January 17th, a week from today at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I thought I was going to do this 2 weeks ago. There were some problems with the scheduling. I messed it up, actually. So I'll be talking about navigating boundaries and choosing how to lose. I could talk about boundaries as a focal point of these broadcasts once a week, and everybody would be satisfied because it's something like we talked about tonight that everybody, even the most expert and experienced among us, consider a practice. All right, folks, thanks for joining me. I hope this was a helpful point of contact for and on behalf of the people that you love and that love you. Thanks for attending and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday about boundaries. Take care. Bye-bye.